Audio on demand from Vision Christian Media.
Foundations.
He says, you shall not wear material mixed with wool and linen together. And the Jewish Bible puts it this way, you are not to wear clothing woven with two kinds of thread, wool and linen together. But if you're a priest, it's different. And if you've got tassels, it's different. It all comes down to the purpose.
Foundations. Understanding the Jewish foundations of our Christian faith. With Robbo Robinson and Mandy Warby.
We've talked on previous programs about some of the strange laws and rules that God gave to his people. Many of them we think are strange at best or ridiculous at worst, but they all had very important significance. They meant something, and in the culture and context of the ancient world, they were practical and visual reminders of what God was trying to teach them. We're going to explore another one of those today, Mandy, with, understanding why the Jews weren't allowed to mix wool and linen.
Yeah, we kind of covered this we just kind of touched on it when we were talking about the tassels, the tzitzit on their clothing, and how there was the prohibition about that God gave his people not to mix wool with linen. But when it came to the tassels,
that was okay.
It was absolutely necessary, and the same with the priestly clothes. They had to be mixed linen and wool.
Interesting.
And you kind of go, what the?
Yeah.
You don't understand why that is. And so we learned that the tzitzit, the tassels themselves, had great significance. They were a visual representation that the entire nation was different. It was the significance that they were a reminder to obey God's word. That was the blue wool woven into the rest of the white linen. And it was a reflection that they were a royal or noble line of people. And then collectively, even though they had a priestly tribe, collectively they were a priestly nation amongst the nations.
Yeah. Could you read this and argue that God contradicts himself in this respect because he gives them one instruction and literally contradicts it with another instruction?
Well, no, because there's a reason for it. It's like any kind of prohibition. You could say to your children, you're not allowed to do X, Y, Z, and then mum and dad might go and do it. But it could have to do with age or maturity or some particular reason that mum and dad are allowed to use a particular appliance or something. There are reasons for it. So it's not a contradiction. It's the purpose. What is the purpose of these prohibitions? It's not just an arbitrary thing. You kind of have to, look at the environment that the Hebrews were in when God gave these prohibitions. He says in Deuteronomy 22:11, he says, you shall not wear material mixed with wool and linen together. And the Jewish Bible puts it this way, you are not to wear clothing woven with two kinds of thread, wool and linen together. But if you're a priest, it's different. And if you've got tassels, it's different. And it all comes down to the purpose. But generally speaking, if you have to look at what the Hebrews were like at the time, you've got to remember they had just had 400 years of slavery in Egypt, a nation that was polytheistic, millions of gods, and statues, idols, and all the rest of it. And God was wanting his people to be very, very distinctly different. I mean, we say, they left Egypt, but then God spent 40 years getting Egypt out of them.
That's right.
And there were lots of prohibitions. There was lots of very strange things, like why on earth would God have said, don't cut the forelocks of your hair for the guys? And you think he wanted them to look strange and have weird hairdos? Not at all. That particular practice was part and parcel of the people of that time in some of the Canaanite place where they would grow those, they would shave the front forelocks as part of their mourning ceremony. Like when I say mourning, the grieving ceremony when somebody died, it was part of a religious practice. So God said, you're not doing that. Now, that's why religious Jews today have these long curly forelocks. It's just because of that particular prohibition. Although if God was giving the law today, he probably wouldn't include that. He might include a whole lot of other things.
Yeah.
And here's the reason why. What was the children of Israel, they come out of Egypt, they cross over, they're waiting in the wilderness. Moses goes up the mountain, has this amazing encounter with God, gets the 10 Commandments, and he's up there for 40 days. And what's the first thing the people do? They rebel. They build a golden calf and they say, we don't know what's happened to Moses, but let's build a golden calf and we'll actually call it Yahweh because we know that Yahweh is powerful. We just saw what he did. He just delivered us. So he done all these miracles, but we're kind of not used to this invisible guy. So we'll make something that we're familiar with. We saw lots of idols when we were in Egypt. So that will be easy. It'll get our focus and we'll worship God that way. We'll call him Yahweh. And here's the thing, these people had to learn a totally different way. So God put these prohibitions in place for a reason. And it was really, really important because they were a priestly nation. Now then, while they're learning that they're a priestly nation, and they did, you remember Korah?
Yep.
Korah was the one who led the rebellion, and he says, you can read it in Numbers 16:3, Korah says, you think you're pretty hot stuff, Moses, but we're all called to worship God and to minister before him. He recognised that the nation was priestly, but he thought that also gave him the right to be a priest.
Yeah, he overstepped his mark, didn't he?
Massively, and it was only the Aaron's family line that were allowed to be priests. Within the Levite priestly nation, tribe, they were all to serve within the temple and serve the people, but only the family line of Aaron were allowed to be priests. Korah overstepped the bounds. You're right. But we've got to be really careful as well. Okay, because one of the things that, like they did in the worshipping the golden calf, is they thought that they could Judaize what was pagan. And taking on an authority, which is what Korah did, trying to take authority onto himself that he had no right to do. The mixing of the wool and the linen was a physical demonstration of what the parameters were, but there were those who wanted to take it beyond what they were allowed. And it's kind of like this. We know that if it's illegal to actually impersonate a police officer. The police officer and his badge gives him the right to make arrests, to go into your house without permission if he needs to, even to shoot somebody and kill them if need be, if that fulfills his requirement as a police officer. But you and I can't do that. And if we put on a badge that's not ours, we're in deep yogurt. We'll go to jail for that.
Yeah.
Well, it is the same. We don't have the right to take on. We are a priestly nation as Christians. We are a priestly people. Like the Jewish people, a priestly nation, to be a light to the Gentiles, but we are not the priest. And we've got to be really careful that we don't overstep the bounds with authority that we don't have. And at the same time, let's not mix what is sacred and profane, accepting what the world says, or embracing bits of pagan this and pagan that and stick a Christian badge on it and a little Christian fish at the bottom and it suddenly becomes sacred. No, we don't have the right to do that. We are a distinctly different people, and we have the Spirit of God within us, and we have a righteous calling, as the Jews do. We are one people. It's funny, the Muslim community, they recognise the people of the book as being the Jews and the Christians. The only people who don't recognise that the Jews and the Christians are one people are the Jews and the Christians.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is, Paul talked about the one new man.
Yeah.
He was talking about Jew and Gentile becoming one new man. And we're the ones who don't get it. So we have this righteous calling, a priestly calling. But within that priestly calling, there are also boundaries and parameters that we're supposed to live within. And that is to be conformed to the Word of God, not overstep the bounds, accepting or claiming authority and power that we don't have. That belongs to the priest. And we have a high priest, a great high priest, and he is also the head of this body.
Yeah.
We don't direct the head directs us. We have to be in submission to that. So, but Paul said, I think it was in Corinthians, where he said that all the examples of what happened to the Hebrew people in the Old Covenant were there as an example for us to learn from. And we just think, they just whinged and wailed about water and quail when they were in the desert, and we've got to learn not to be whingers. No, there was so much that they had to live by, according to, and how they conducted themselves, and it's all example for us to learn. And that's why there's the prohibition of mixing wool and linen for the general populace, but for the function of the priesthood and as a distinctly different people, that's why it was actually required.
Yeah. I guess at the end of the day, it's about submitting to the authority of the Lord. If you don't understand the command, it doesn't mean you don't do it. You do it anyway, even though you may not understand why he's given that instruction.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully that helps to explain why the Jews were instructed not to mix wool and linen. As always, there's more in the notes. You can check them out online at vision.org.au/foundations. Well, on the next program, we're going to be looking at a new definition of the word weird.
This has been Foundations, a look at the Jewish foundations of our Christian faith. For study notes, resources and more, see vision.org.au/foundations.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.